During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about fertility management in your garden, in your lawn, in your shelter belt. Some of these small areas, yeah, they're not a lot of acres or anything, but you know what? Around your place, you want it to look nice. You want your garden to be the best. The key is fertility, and that's why it's our topic today.
I'm going to start with the yard, and here's a thing for me, just for my own yard. Last fall, I had one of my sons go out, pull soil samples in the yard. We pulled soil samples in the front, we pulled soil samples in the back, and we were going to manage each a little bit differently. Well, it turns out we were dramatically short in potassium. That was by far our biggest limiting factor for growth in our lawn. And you think about it, if you're bagging clippings off your lawn ever, and a lot of people do this right around their house because they don't want to see all the clippings, or maybe they've got little kids or pets playing in the yard there and they don't want them to be drugged back into the house. When you take away those clippings, you're taking away a lot of potassium. If you've done this at your home for years, chances are you really need potassium fertilizer. So it's something that you need to look at. If fields in your area are short, that's a good indication that your lawn is probably short as well. And so when you pull those soil samples and you see that, address it by getting the right fertility mix out in your lawn.
All right, Darren talked about two things I wanted you to focus on. Number one is soil testing. I realize it might only be 1/100th of an acre that we're talking about here, but you know what? It only costs 25 bucks to have a soil completely analyzed for everything from pH to cation exchange capacity, base saturation, micronutrients, and the ever popular NP and K. But the reason why I bring up all those other things is you've got to have a complete test. It might be NP and K that's limiting you, like Darren said with potassium, but it might be something else. That's why we've got to know, you've got to have a good soil test. Now, Darren mentioned potassium in lawns. Where I think about potassium is shelter belts. Trees need a crazy amount of potassium. We want that base saturation level to be 7 to 8% on the base saturation K test on that soil test. For normal crops, we say 4 to 8%. Trees, at least 7% base saturation K. You've got to have a lot of potassium if you want a great, big, nice, healthy tree.
Hey, I should mention too, in lawns, I talked about potassium. Obviously, lawns need a lot of nitrogen if you want to have them green all through the season. But the other key nutrients are calcium and sulfur. So we use a lot of ammonium sulfate and calcium sulfate, which is gypsum, out in lawns. Those seem to be two of the best fertility products you could put out in lawns. Now, in gardens, I still suggest doing a full, complete soil test, even if your garden is pretty small. You think about it, wow, that's 25 bucks, and I may just have this small little area of a garden. That's fine, but think about how much produce you're going to raise out of that garden. If you could double the amount of produce that you're raising, think about how many less dollars you'd spend at the grocery store.
The last thing I'll say is we really want you to look at what's your cation exchange capacity, multiply that times 10. That's the most that your soil can hold on a per acre basis for nitrogen. So for example, let's say your cation exchange capacity was 11. 11 times 10 is 110 pounds on a whole acre. If we're talking 1/100th of an acre, that's 1 pound of nitrogen. It's very common for people with small little areas, a small lawn, a small garden, to throw on 100 pounds of nitrogen. You put 100 times too much nitrogen out there, number one, it's way overdoing it. It's actually bad for the garden, it's bad for the lawn, but the other side of it is there is a tremendous amount of environmental contamination. On the farm, if we ever exceed our nitrogen, we might go above by 3% or 5%, maybe 10%, not 100-fold what you actually need, and we very commonly find that in small areas like in town.
The real key to be successful in your shelter belt, in your lawn, or in your garden is to pull a soil sample and address the fertility needs of whatever you're trying to grow. While out in fields, one of the most important things is to control our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?